Hello and welcome back to Always Ours, Chapter 9, Consequences, Part 1. Summary. There are consequences to messing with the flow of time. Let's see a few. Hisashi Yamada was wrapping up the sports festival drama, still struggling to make sense of how Hitachi Shinso had managed to win it all. Not that he disliked the kid. In fact, Shinso reminded him so much of Ayazawa when they were both younger that if he didn't know any better, he had sworn the boy was Shota's secret love child. Hisashi's thoughts blurred, the festival itself already a jumble in his mind. He could picture the strange match between Izuku Midoriya and Shinso, but why did his memory insist that Izuku had faced a different person? Maybe too many late nights plotting his radio segment for the internship week were finally catching up to him. The city streets were brisk and cool, the sharp smell of exhaust and distant food stalls grounding him as he walked to clear his head. That was when he heard it, a metallic whisper, like a sword being drawn. Instinct, honed by years of training with Ayazawa, kicked in. He ducked just in time. The blade struck the wall behind him, sending a shower of dust and plaster into his hair. He didn't have to look. The hero killer, Stain. He knew the stories. Heroes found with stab wounds. Always the same calling card. Hisashi's pulse hammered in his ears. He wished, in that moment, he'd said goodbye to his friends. He knew his limits. Stain was out of his league. But he had an ace up his sleeve, a sound attack so intense he'd sworn to never use it unless there was no other way. It shattered eardrums, left people reeling. Today was all he had left. He let Stain get closer, feeling the blade pierce his suit, a spike of agony near his heart. So much for the expensive under armor, good for slashes, worthless for a stab. Fear and despair threatened to drown him, but he clung to a single desperate hope. With the last burst of strength, he unleashed his blast. Blood trickled from Stain's ears. Good, he thought, as his vision faded. If he was going down, at least he'd made the hero killer bleed. He woke to antiseptic and the low beep of monitors, a young police officer telling him how lucky he was to be alive. The hospital air was thick with the scent of disinfectant and distant flowers. Heard you got yourself stabbed. The dryness in the voice made him smile despite the pain. Only Shota could sound so unimpressed by near death. Yeah, well, I keep asking myself why. I like to think I'm a good hero. I donate to charity, run an anti-suicide hotline, volunteer for the soup kitchen. What did I do to get that jerk's attention? Who knows what psychos think. More importantly, what do you remember about the attack? Did you catch what his quirk was? What did he fight like? Dude, what's with the strange questions? He fought like you. No, I don't remember his freaking quirk. He stabbed me before he even used it. Better than nothing. I can work with this. Shota left as abruptly as he'd arrived. Hisashi stared at the ceiling, fighting the urge to cry. What an awful beginning to a so-called normal internship week. Once the shock of his accidental marriage to Splinter had faded, and he firmly decided, no, I'm not going to fix this, Nezu returned to his mountain of internship paperwork. The office was quiet. The only sound the soft scratch of pen on paper and the hum of heating vents. He reviewed every placement before giving the final approval, and this year's batch left him rather perplexed. Izuku Midoriya and Raphael from 1B were both headed to Kamui Woods. Woods was a logical fit for Izuku's new capture quirk, but Nezu could forget the way Woods had berated the boy after the Sludgeville incident. Raphael had been flagged by Can for a hair-trigger temper, hardly a natural match for the calm, methodical Kamui woods. Ryuko had selected Hamato Leonardo. Netsu didn't know why this made his fur crawl, but Ryuko was a good hero, and Leonardo was skilled. Surely it would be fine. Todoroki Shoto had picked Wash of all people, a deliberate snub to his father, perhaps? Koji Koda would be with Mirko. Ojiro, for some reason, was going to Endeavor. The other placements seemed equally odd, except Hagakure, who had made no secret of wanting to stand out. Netsu smiled to himself. Students needed room to make mistakes. Who was he to meddle? He finalized the papers and set them aside, feeling the rare thrill of having 2 weeks without students to worry about. Just a brand new spouse to romance. The thought made his tail twitch. He'd watched plenty of human courtship rituals, read a few romance novels, but none of it seemed to apply. Splinter hated attention. A fancy dinner was out. Tea, perhaps? But that felt boring. He needed advice. Namori would know what to do. She was good with scandals and romance alike. She'd be perfect. Are you certain it was a different quirk? And it wasn't the boy's quirk? Gran Torino's voice was grave, echoing off the sterile gray walls of the meeting room. All Might slumped in his chair, looking even smaller than usual. The boy claimed to be quirkless when we met, but I know that late bloomers are a thing, as are false negatives. But the record for both of those was 9 years old, not 14. And with how violent that quirk was, now I don't know what to think. What if he's been lying the whole time? The timing is suspicious, Mirai said, adjusting his glasses. A quirkless boy suddenly manifesting a powerful quirk on top of One for All, a quirk that only manifested when he was angry. It doesn't add up, Toshinori. You must see how this looks. You don't think I don't know that? I was panicking the moment he manifested those tendrils. But the boy has done nothing wrong. I admit, it's suspicious. A boy his age manifesting a quirk based on anger. But maybe, did you ever think, maybe that was why it didn't manifest? Maybe he never got angry enough for long enough. We've heard weirder activations, especially for what looks like a sentient or sapient quirk. All that is conjecture. I told you from the start. You should have picked Mirio. Mirai pressed on. I've investigated his entire background. I can guarantee Mirio is exactly what he claims to be. Can you say the same about Midoriya? All Might's fists clenched. It was a gut feeling. Something about Mirio felt wrong. You turned down my prediction quirk, the one that's never been wrong, for a gut feeling? Mirai's voice was ice. The only logical explanation is that the boy is unfit for One for All. But we can still fix this. We call him back after internships. Explain that you need to reclaim the quirk and give it to someone we can trust. All Might's shoulders sank. Stop pressuring me. If Izuku is one of All for One's plants, isn't it my responsibility to ensure he's safe? And if he isn't, then I'd be destroying an innocent boy's dreams. Gran Torino rested a weathered hand on his arm. Toshinori, we both know this is All for One's style, but we can't afford to hesitate if the kid's compromised. Not with those reports about Nomu with multiple quirks. The silence that followed was heavy, the weight of possible regret pressing down on All Might. Takeru, the name he'd chosen for himself. He'd been tempted to reclaim Deku, but the bitterness of the word and the anger it stirred made him hesitate. He should have told Uraraka more forcefully what it meant, but she was so kind, and he remembered what anger could do. He'd learned young, after his father vanished, that anger only brought fear and disappointment. The memory of his mother's fearful eyes haunted him, and so he'd buried his temper, hidden every bad feeling beneath a mask of eagerness and detachment. It was a handy shield, especially when Kacchan and his friends reminded him of his place. Now standing in Kamui Wood's agency, every nerve was on edge. He didn't want to be here, not after the way Kamui Woods had treated him during the Sludge Village incident. But this new quirk, which he managed to pass off as another variation of the stockpile type, needed refinement, and Woods was a master of capture techniques. He just hoped he would learn something useful, and that Raphael, his gruff fellow intern, wouldn't become another problem. When Shoto was finally allowed to attend school, he'd learned one vital thing. Once he turned 18, he could leave his abuser behind for good. Bubble Girl, a TA at the time, couldn't intervene, but she could give him advice. She told him that to siphon cash from Endeavor's credit card, stash it away, and record every training session for evidence. Then when the day came, he could vanish, maybe even emigrate, become a cold weather rescue specialist in Canada, and never use his father's quirk again. He'd show everyone at the sports festival that his ice was enough. He hadn't needed his father's power. When the offers came, he'd pick the lowest ranked hero he could find. Wash, a mascot hero, as far from Endeavor's ideals as possible. Manuel was there too. And water and ice weren't so different. He'd make it work. If it angered his father, all the better. Ryuko had chosen a first year for her agency. Not even Najiri had earned that honor. Yet something about Hamato Leonardo had drawn her in. He'd performed admirably at the sports festival until the match against another 1B student with a similar quirk. They'd been evenly matched until Leonardo collapsed mid-battle. Quirk exhaustion, they called it. She didn't buy it. A strange protective pull urged her to select him. If she'd had space, she might have offered internship to Raphael as well. There was something about these boys with heteromorphic quirks, a feeling that perhaps the world of heroes was missing something, and she could help them find it. Across the city, on a squat rooftop across the Kamui Woods agency, a shadow crouched, sword balanced across scarred knees. Stain watched the tall window, gaze cold and appraising. He remembered Kamui Woods from the news, the so-called hero who'd shouted down a child for rescuing another child, while other heroes stood by and did nothing. It made Stain's blood boil. Heroes like that were a disease, infecting society with hypocrisy. He would call this one next. Stain's lips twisted into a bloodless snarl. Let the agencies parade their hopeful interns. He would remind them what it meant to be a true hero, through blood, if necessary. And that's the end of that chapter.